Yes, thank you so much, everyone, for having me back again. So lovely to do another talk with you guys. And we are going to be getting into Ruth chapter 3 today, which I know that you guys have already read, so we won't read it again. I'm going to start with a little scenario that I want you to think about. Consider a mother who has organized a babysitter for the evening. Now, this babysitter, he promises to be there at 7 o'clock sharp, but he turns up half an hour late. When the mother gets home, the kids aren't in bed, the candy stash is depleted, the dishes are not done, and the house is a mess. Now, the next time the babysitter tells this mum, "Don't worry, I've got everything under control," do you think she'll believe him? Probably not. She may say, "Oh no, I trust him," but her actions will tell you otherwise. She'll be anxious, she'll be consistently checking in, checking her phone, she won't be able to relax and enjoy her night because she feels like she can't put her trust in this babysitter. Faith always depends on the character of the person that you are trusting. If they are unreliable or selfish or uncaring, your faith in them is going to be shaky at best. In Ruth 3, we see Ruth and Naomi display a great deal of faith. And the reason that they can do that is because they are trusting in the character of the one that they are trusting, Boaz. And we'll see that our faith works in a similar way. Our faith is only as good as the Redeemer that we are trusting in. So we're up to chapter 3 of Ruth. And this chapter, we will see that Ruth and Naomi are going to make a plan for how they are going to secure their future. The chapter starts off with Naomi chatting with Ruth and devising a scheme to lock down Boaz. At this stage, Ruth and Naomi, they are in an incredibly precarious situation. They are both husbandless, and in this society, in this time, this means that they are looking at a life of poverty. How can they avoid this? By finding someone for Ruth to marry, by finding a home for her. Now, I don't know about you, but as I am reading Naomi's plan, I do get a little bit nervous. It sounds risky, and it also sounds a bit risque. Like, as you're reading, you really wonder, what's about to happen? Naomi tells Ruth to take a shower, to put on some perfume, to put on her best clothes, and then to sneak onto the threshing floor and lie by Boaz as he's sleeping. Anyone else a little bit nervous? Ruth tells Naomi, nope, other way around. Naomi tells Ruth to wait and to see what he says. There's a lot of suspense. And Ruth's like, yep, I'm cool, I'm on board with this. And she carries out Naomi's plan. Under the cover of darkness, she sneaks onto the threshing floor. She waits for Boaz, who's been doing some eating and drinking and celebrating at the end of the harvest, uncovers his feet and lies down. The cover of darkness, the secrecy, the text is kind of priming the reader to think that this might end up being some sort of inappropriate, like, sexual encounter. What's Boaz going to do when he wakes up? But just when you're thinking, oh no, oh no, oh no, the story takes a turn, and we breathe a sigh of relief. There isn't anything inappropriate or weird about this. Rather, it is a story of Ruth and Naomi taking a step of faith and seeking out God's provision through Boaz. Ruth says to Boaz when he wakes up, "Spread the corner of your garment over me, since you are a guardian redeemer of our family." Now, when Ruth says to Boaz, "Spread the corner of your garment over me," She's saying, spread your wings over me. It can be translated like that. And in saying this, Ruth is actually reminding Boaz of something that he himself had said to Ruth earlier in chapter 2, verse 12, when he said, may you be richly rewarded by the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge. So when Ruth says, spread your wings over me, she's asking Boaz to be the one through whom God is going to provide that refuge. How? By being her guardian redeemer. What's all this about? Well, a guardian redeemer was someone who had an obligation, according to God's law, to redeem a relative who was in difficulty. You might remember in Kate's first talk, she talked a little bit about what marriage was like in ancient Israel. Marriage wasn't just between a husband and a wife, it was a community thing. And when a woman got married, she would join her husband's family, and they were now responsible for her. This meant that if her husband died, his brother or the closest male relative had the responsibility of becoming her husband, her source of security, provision, and care. So Ruth was asking Boaz to rescue her, to be the channel through which God would provide for her and Naomi. Ruth was asking Boaz to be faithful to God's law. Now, this is a big request. How does Boaz respond? Well, he's willing to do all that she asks, but says, first, there's someone who's closer in relation to her. And this isn't him making up an excuse and avoiding his responsibilities. We know that because he basically promises that she will have a guardian redeemer. If it's not the closer relative, then it will be Boaz himself. So Ruth goes back to Naomi the next morning with a bunch of grain from Boaz, successful in her faith-filled mission, but still waiting in faith for Boaz to finalize the matters. So, in this story, Ruth and Naomi show extraordinary faith in Yahweh to provide for them through Boaz. And from their example, we can learn more about what faith looks like. So today we're going to look at 3 things that faith requires through the story. What we see is faith requires action, patience, and vulnerability. Firstly, we see from their example that faith requires action. Naomi and Ruth are both bold in their plans and in their actions. They take initiative, they move forward, they are intentional about their movements. They express their faith in Boaz, and so in Yahweh, by asking him to act. On the screen, we've got verses 1 to 4, which is Naomi's plan. And you can see as you're reading it that this plan is bold, this plan is brave, this plan is risky. And Naomi doesn't just sit around doing nothing, waiting for something to happen. That's not what faith is. It's not how it's shown and described here. Naomi shows her faith in Boaz through crafting this bold plan and stepping out. We also see Ruth's faith expressed in action throughout the passage. Let's look at one example in verse 9, which we read before. I am your servant, Ruth. Spread your corner of your garment over me, since you are the guardian redeemer of our family. The request that she makes is bold. Remember when she says, spread your wings over me, she's asking him to be the one through whom God provides refuge. A bold request, showing her faith in both Boaz and in Yahweh. So we see that Naomi and Ruth don't sit passively, but they exercise their faith in action. Faith requires a deliberate and bold reaching out towards your Redeemer. So, what does that mean for us? Well, ask yourself this slightly uncomfortable question. Are you disguising passivity as faithfulness? Are you frozen? Are you stuck, not moving forward? Are you not stepping forward and out in faith? Do you feel maybe it's better to stay where it is safe? And this could be in a number of areas. Maybe it's in like work or life direction. Maybe it's in sharing your faith with your non-Christian friends. Maybe it's something else. Insert your situation here. But ask yourself, am I being passive? And am I disguising that as faithfulness? There could be a number of reasons for why we are passive. It might be fear or lack of motivation. But is it a lack of faith in God's sovereignty and in his provision? Remember that faith requires action. So be bold and take initiative. Step out in faith. Now, yes, faith requires action. Ruth and Naomi have done their part, but they know that they are dependent not only on themselves. So secondly, we see that faith requires patience. Ruth and Naomi reach out towards their Redeemer, Boaz, but they also recognize that once they have done their part, they need to wait on their Redeemer to act. Let's read verse 4, where Naomi tells Ruth, "Go and uncover his feet and lie down. He will tell you what to do." Naomi tells Ruth that there is a sense of unknown here. She will need to be patient for the outcome of the act of faith. Ruth will need to wait as she carries out the plan. In having faith, she needs to be patient for Boaz's response. And what Boaz tells her in verses 12 to 13 require more waiting. He says, "Although it is true that I am a guardian redeemer of your family, there is another who is more closely related than I. Stay here for the night, and in the morning, if he wants to do his duty as your guardian redeemer, good, let him redeem you. But if he is not willing, as surely as the Lord lives, I will do it." Ruth and Naomi need to continue to be patient. With faith comes waiting, because faith is reaching out for something that is in the future. There's no faith without patience. And until our faith is effective, we kind of live in this tension. But even in the tension, look at how Naomi shows faith in Boaz. In verse 18, Naomi says, "Wait, my daughter, until you find out what happens, for the man will not rest until the matter is settled today." This is the last verse of the chapter. Even at the end of the chapter, they are still waiting. But you see their faith in Boaz is revealed in their wait. So what does this look like for us? Well, you can ask yourself this uncomfortable question. Are you trying to make your own plans happen in your own timing? Guilty. Just like for Ruth and Naomi, we will have a part to play in stepping out in faith. But faith requires us to be patient. We cannot make things happen for ourselves because we are not God. We are not sovereign, we are not in control, and that's hard. Particularly when life isn't going the way that you thought it would, or the way that you wanted it to go. And this can lead us to acting out of anxiety or desperation or a lack of prayer. But remember, the wait is a part of faith. So have faith that God will act in his time according to his character and his promises. The final thing that we see is that faith requires vulnerability. Naomi and Ruth's plan is risky for many reasons. The plan leaves Ruth in a position where she is dependent on Boaz's response. Ruth is vulnerable in terms of her safety. You've seen in earlier talks that Ruth is set during the time of the judges. And in this time, women are incredibly vulnerable, particularly unmarried women. And in carrying out this plan, Ruth is placing herself in a very exposed situation. Any other securities that Ruth may have had are stripped away from her. She is open to the possibility of abuse from Boaz or any other man that might come her way. And the build-up of this story can make us nervous. In this situation, Boaz could have taken advantage of Ruth's presence in the dead of night. He may have seen it as a license to sin. Ruth is also vulnerable in terms of her reputation. The threshing floor was a place of work, yes, but it was also associated with immoral behavior. So when Boaz opens his eyes and sees her at his feet, what could he think of her? Perhaps Ruth's actions could be mistaken by Boaz. They could have been misconstrued. The riskiness of this plan reveals, though, that they have faith in Boaz and in his character. And in carrying out Naomi's plan and asking Boaz to be her guardian redeemer, Ruth is placing herself in a vulnerable position and letting go of any other securities. So for us, are we vulnerable with God? Do we acknowledge that He is the one and only true source of our security? Or are you putting your faith in something else for your security? Are you putting your security in wealth, in your relationship status, your abilities, or your performance? Being vulnerable with God is what is required for us to come to faith initially, for us to surrender our lives to Jesus, to enter relationship with Him. We need to be truly vulnerable, to recognize and acknowledge that we cannot find security in anything else. But we need to be truly humble in our sinful state and openly cry out to God. It's part of the first step of faith. But this vulnerability continues as we walk in faith. Every day we make faith-filled decisions. We are saying to God that our security rests in Him alone. Now, what we can see from this whole situation is that pretty clearly we see that from this interaction that the effectiveness of Ruth and Naomi's faith is totally dependent on the character of Boaz. It's the only reason why they can be vulnerable, why they can be patient. It's the only reason why they can step out and act in faith. Their whole plan hinges on Boaz's response. So from this interaction, we can see and learn a lot about who Boaz is. Here's a list of character qualities of who Boaz is. We know that he is powerful. He's a man of wealth, of status, of social standing. He has the ability to redeem Ruth and Naomi. He has the means to provide for them. He can give them the home security and provision that they need. He has the ability to be the refuge that they need. He is powerful. Boaz is faithful. As we read in verses 11 to 12, Boaz says, "Now, my daughter, don't be afraid. I will do for you all you ask. All the people of my town know that you are a woman of noble character. Although it is true that I am a guardian redeemer of our family, there is another who is more closely related than I. We see that Boaz is committed to being faithful to God's law. He's also committed to following it correctly. So he's committed to giving the closer relative the opportunity to fulfill his covenant obligations. But we see that Boaz is committed not only to fulfilling the bare minimum of the law, but also willing to fulfill the spirit of the law. As we read on in verse 13, Boaz says, "Stay here for the night, and in the morning, if he wants to do his duty as your guardian redeemer, good. Let him redeem you. But if he is not willing, as surely as the Lord lives, I will do it." So we see that Boaz is committed to seeing God's law fulfilled, and he will make sure that it is fulfilled somehow. He isn't the closest family member, so he doesn't really have an obligation to become Ruth's guardian redeemer, but he will do it anyway because he is committed to being faithful to God's law. So yes, Boaz is powerful, Boaz is faithful, and we see that Boaz is also generous. He provides generously for Ruth and Naomi. They're still waiting for a guardian redeemer by the end of the chapter, but Boaz shows that he will provide for them in the meantime. Before going to the town to sort out the kinsman redeemer situation, he says this in verse 15, "Bring me the shawl you are wearing and hold it out." When she did so, he poured into it 6 measures of barley and placed the bundle on her. Then he went back to town. Boaz will provide for them as a kinsman redeemer, but until that, he also provides for them with the food that they need. And he is generous in this provision. One commentary told me that 6 measures of barley is about 30 kilos, which I don't know how she would have carried that. But whatever the exact amount, the idea we should get from this is one of abundance and generosity. Boaz is powerful, but he is also faithful and generous. He's kind, he's caring, he lives with integrity. You can go on and on about seeing his character. And Naomi knew that she could have faith in him because he shows this consistency and integrity in how he responds to them. Their faith is made secure because of Boaz's character. Their faith is effective because of the one that they are trusting. Boaz points us forward to a greater Redeemer in Jesus. The faith that we place in Jesus is effective because of his character. As Christians, we walk in faith by faith every day. Not just the first day when we gave our lives to him, but every day. Remember that unreliable babysitter, the one you couldn't relax with because deep down you knew that they aren't dependable? That's what it's like when you try to place your faith in someone that doesn't have that strength of character. It leaves you anxious, second-guessing, restless. But Jesus is nothing like that. Our Redeemer has already proven his character to us. At the cross, he showed us his generous love. In his resurrection, he showed us his power. And in his promises, he shows us his faithfulness. So when we feel passive and frozen and stuck, or when we are grasping for control, anxious and frantic, when we can't honestly say, "God, I trust you," we remember that our faith is not about ourselves. Our faith isn't about the strength of our faith. Our faith is about the character of our faithful God. That's why we can act in faith. That's why we can wait in faith. That's why we can be vulnerable in our faith. Our faith is dependent on the character of our God, who we know is deeply loving, kind, generous, and powerful. Let me pray for us. Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you so much for who you are as a God who is faithful, as a God who is trustworthy, a God who we can place our faith in, a God who is loving and generous and kind, and who fulfills promises to us. Help us as we live our lives, help us as we walk by faith to be able to see you for who you are and place our faith in you. Help us not to be grasping and trying to control our lives for ourselves and make things happen in our own timing, but recognize you as sovereign. Help us to take bold steps of faith towards you, towards other people, remembering that you hold us always. Yeah, I pray, God, that you would help us to always see you for who you are, and in the everyday moments of life, remember you as our good, loving, kind, generous, faithful, trustworthy God. Amen.